Hello and welcome. I just had a thought before recording of if you could see the space that I'm in, the clothes on the bed, the dishes piled up in the sink, and it's quite understandable that there would be the urge to clear and sort through all of that before recording. It feels a bit more, sometimes a thorn in the side, that something needs doing, and it can almost disrupt anything else. But then I realised I've been carrying that thought for several days there of let me take care of the dishes first and put my clothes away, fold them away, and then I can record. So instead, here I am, and in some ways there's not a huge amount of importance if the sink is full of dishes, if there's clothes that need to be put away in sight. This can also exist in a spacious presence. And I'm glad I sat down and plugged in my mic and hit record in spite of everything else. And it's quite funny, the simplest things, or in some cases trivial things, can delay or cause a bit of an illusion of that, well, I can't do this yet because this needs to be done first, but in reality it's not the case quite often. It's more of a conditioning or a thought, a habit, and sometimes it can get in the way of what is truly needed, what's truly wanted. Of course, this is a very trivial and small example, but you can imagine with other serious areas of life that something is not being done that is very much needed or wanted because something else has not been completed first. And quite often when it comes under the light of awareness and really look at it, it's clear that what's needed can be done immediately. It can be enjoyed and absorbed, and the other less important activities can be done when they are done. And it's often a thought that gets in the way of how life should be. Now, I'm in two minds whether to share a little bit about what's going on with me in my personal sort of journey, my life situation. I know with this podcast it's part of that. It's included with that, my journey, and I know it's been a while since that's been mentioned, but perhaps I don't have the desire to go into it in much depth, but perhaps I can lightly mention a thing or two that I guess the main point to share is that things are becoming more challenging for me. Certain energies and desires for interacting, human interaction, it's receding almost. if you imagine a tide on a beach, the water, it's receding there. It's not personal. And of course, in all of our lives, there are people who present more challenges than others, and it's just the nature, the chemistry, the conditionings and viewpoints we all carry, that where more challenges are there for some people, some interactions, and less so with others. It's just the way it is. Nothing personal. And for myself, it's more across the board. And it's the case of where this is where it's incredibly difficult to explain with words. It feels the more words are used, excuse me, the more words are used, then in some ways it becomes more unclear. But it's just to say that the mental energy that's needed to engage and to interact is simply not there. And there's a sense of, I've probably used this word before in the past, of a sense of unwellness there. There's almost a bit of overwhelm, and there's a sense of reaching a threshold of stress or depletion or mental fatigue, and then so there's nothing left to use energy-wise. And that's just accepting how it is in this moment. Same with looking after myself, and even sometimes when it's taking a shower or cooking, everything seems to be receding in this moment, and doesn't seem like there's too much that can be done. It feels like what's needing to be done at this moment is happening. There's some awareness of sleep, of getting better sleep, using sleep hygiene, going to bed at a certain time. So it's quite, for me, it's quite erratic right now, but there's the intention and awareness for that to smooth out, for that to incorporate slowly the regular times to sleep and to wake up. And there's a small amount of movement with food as well, to understand the balance of adding some healthy meals to my nutrition. So there's a small amount of energy, a small amount of movement here or there. That's all that is available to me at this moment. So that's almost happening on its own. And of course, the main practice here is non-resistance, accepting how it is in this moment. And if there's action that can be taken to remedy, to help, then it will come from the space of awareness, whatever is available to me. So it's almost trusting that, versus going into the mind and looking at what's perceived normal or what majority of everyone else is doing. It feels like it's the wrong measurement to use. It's not accurate in that way. So generally, there are more challenges, and this includes practice of of being present as well. There's a noticing of large times when presence isn't available to me, or it's been covered. Usually afterwards I've come out of that, then there's the retrospective thought or understanding that I wasn't present for the entire morning, or I was swept up in thought of emotions. And what doesn't seem to be happening is story, which is very helpful to me. So if there is one, it's a very light narrative, perhaps a sentence or two about what's going on, but there isn't a huge detailed story. You can imagine in an unconscious mind in a day, there could be a novel about what happened, about who said what and how they said it, and then this happened, and then I'm sure you can go into a cafe and you can understand the meaning of that when overhearing some conversations, the level of detail and the emotion, and immediately there's the understanding that the conversation that's taken place, it's going to be carried for weeks or months. The structure, the viewpoint of a certain situation. So I'm grateful and aware that that's not the case here. It's largely that's part down to the mind is just it's at a fragile space, so there isn't enough processing power. If you look at a computer to kind of store that, there isn't enough storage available. So in some ways there's some benefits. And again, it seems like everything's being affected by this, including these recordings. That there's, as much as I would like to record regularly, it doesn't seem to be happening or available, which is fine. It's nothing wrong with that. The recordings seem to happen as they happen, unfold as they unfold. So in some ways there's an acceptance of what I am able to do is in the present moment. So now there's an acceptance that I'm recording, but there's no thoughts that I should have recorded, I should have done this earlier, or there's nothing but being present, recording. Whether I recorded a month or a year ago or recorded a day ago, it's no bearing on what's happening in this moment. So with that brief, not sure how much can be gauged from what I've shared there for my journey, but that's probably all I can manage for the moment. And more importantly than that, we can move on with a new earth, and let's see where we are. So I believe we've just read the passage of the ego and the present moment. Yes, there's the question we left in the last episode of the relationship you have with the present moment. What is the relationship to the present moment? And that's something that's come up for me from the last recording. It's the question that stayed with me. It's been effortlessly carried and prompted. It comes up as a thought. And I wonder how it's been for you, if you've For those who've listened to the previous episode, perhaps it didn't come up at all, or perhaps it was a very powerful teaching and pointer, catching at times, realigning yourself to the centered space of awareness. So this passage is titled The Paradox of Time. On the surface, the present moment is what happens. Since what happens changes continuously, it seems that every day of your life consists of thousands of moments in which different things happen. Time is seen as the endless succession of moments, some good, some bad. Yet, if you look more closely, that is to say, through your own immediate experience, you find that there are not many moments at all. You discover that there is only ever this moment. Life is always now. Your entire life unfolds in this constant now. Even past or future moments only exist when you remember or anticipate them, and you do so by thinking about them in the only moment there is, this one. Why does it appear then as if there were many moments? Because the present moment is confused with what happens, confused with content. The space of now is confused with what happens in that space. The confusion of the present moment with content gives rise not only to the illusion of time, but also to the illusion of ego. There is a paradox here. On the one hand, how can we deny the reality of time? You need it to go from here to there, to prepare a meal, build a house, read this book. You need time to grow up, to learn new things. Whatever you do seems to take time. Everything is subject to it, and eventually this bloody tyrant time, as Shakespeare calls it, is going to kill you. You could compare it to a raging river that drags you along with it, or a fire in which everything is consumed. I recently met some old friends, a family I had not seen in a long time, and I was shocked when I saw them. I almost asked, "Are you ill? What happened? Who did this to you?" The mother, who walked with a cane, seemed to have shrunk in size, her face shriveled like an old apple. The daughter, who had been full of energy, enthusiasm, and the expectations of youth when I last saw her, seemed worn out, tired after bringing up 3 children. Then I remembered almost 30 years had passed since we last met. Time had done this to them, and I'm sure they were just as shocked when they saw me. Everything seems to be subject to time, yet it all happens in the now. That is the paradox. Wherever you look, there is plenty of circumstantial evidence for the reality of time. A rotting apple, your face in the bathroom mirror compared to your face in a photo taken 30 years ago. Yet you never find any direct evidence. You never experience time itself. You only ever experience the present moment, or rather, what happens in it. If you go by direct evidence only, then there is no time, and the now is all there ever is. The following passage, the next passage, is titled Eliminating Time. You cannot make the egoless state into a future goal and then work toward it. All you get is more dissatisfaction, more inner conflict, because it will always seem that you have not arrived yet, have not attained that state yet. When freedom from ego is your goal for the future, you give yourself more time, and more time means more ego. Look carefully to find out if your spiritual search is a disguised form of ego. Even trying to get rid of yourself can be a disguised search for more if the getting rid of yourself is made into a future goal. Giving yourself more time is precisely this, giving yourself more time. Time, that is to say, past and future, is what the false mind-made self, the ego, lives on, and time is in your mind. It isn't something that has an objective experience out there. It is a mind structure needed for sensory perception, indispensable for practical purposes, but the greatest hindrance to knowing yourself. Time is the horizontal dimension of life, the surface layer of reality. Then there is the vertical dimension of depth, accessible to you only through the portal of the present moment. So instead of adding time to yourself, remove time. The elimination of time from your consciousness is the elimination of ego. It is the only true spiritual practice. When we speak of the elimination of time, we are, of course, not referring to clock time, which is the use of time for practical purposes, such as making an appointment or planning a trip. It would be almost impossible to function in this world without clock time. What we are speaking of is the elimination of psychological time, which is the egoic mind's endless preoccupation with past and future, and its unwillingness to be one with life by living in alignment with the inevitable isness of the present moment. Whenever a habitual no to life turns into a yes, whenever you allow this moment to be as it is, you dissolve time as well as ego. For the ego to survive, it must make time, past and future, more important than the present moment. The ego cannot tolerate becoming friendly with the present moment, except briefly, just after it got what it wanted. But nothing can satisfy the ego for long. As long as it runs your life, there are two ways of being unhappy. Not getting what you want is one. Getting what you want is the other. Whatever is or happens is the form that the now takes. As long as you resist it internally, form, that is to say, the world, is an impenetrable barrier that separates you from who you are beyond form, separates you from the formless one life that you are. When you bring an inner yes to the form the now takes, that very form becomes a doorway into the formless. The separation between the world and God dissolves. When you react against the form that life takes at this moment, when you treat the now as a means, an obstacle, or an enemy, you strengthen your own form identity, the ego. Hence the ego's reactivity. What is reactivity? Becoming addicted to reaction. The more reactive you are, the more entangled you become with form. The more identified with form, the stronger the ego. Your being then does not shine through form anymore, or only barely. Through non-resistance to form, that in you which is beyond form emerges as an all-encompassing presence, a silent power far greater than your short-lived form identity, the person. It is more deeply who you are than anything in the world of form. That brings us to the end of that passage, and perhaps a good place to pause before the following passage, which is titled The Dreamer and the Dream. So you can save that for the next episode there. So a very relatable explanation of time, the mentioning of the countless individual moments of time, and then the understanding of just the one moment of time. The one moment where everything exists, everything happens. So just to go over the last pointer mentioned in this passage, where it is said, through non-resistance to form being thoughts, feelings, that in you, so thoughts, non-resistance to form within yourself, there is a silent power. So through non-resistance to form, that in you which is beyond form emerges as an all-encompassing presence. A silent power far greater than your short-lived form identity, the person. This emerges itself. And it's almost, as we mentioned before, the contrast of life, the contrast where through non-resistance of life, there is a noticing, there is a different quality. And it's almost, there's always a line from resisting to non-resisting. And it may be a very small millisecond gap or a blink of an eye of realignment, or sometimes it could be days, hours, days, weeks of resisting. Then there's a non-resistance to it, there's a letting go. And maybe there's a deeper understanding there where there isn't a gap at all, there is just that constant non-resistance where there's no beginning and end to it. So the non-resistant allows for the emergence of the all-encompassing presence, a silent power far greater than your short-lived form identity, the person. And it is said finally that it is more deeply who you are than anything in the world of form. Something to absorb and to reflect. Okay, thank you for joining me for this episode, and I will speak to you again very soon. Take care.